Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and today I will talk about why I believe Microsoft Flight Simulator is hands down the best flight simulator available. And we will split this one into several categories, which are going to be aircraft, visuals, world, flight model, weather, performance, updates, and finally usage for real-life flight training. So stay tuned. Let's start with category number 1, which is aircraft. Microsoft Flight Simulator comes initially with a similar amount of aircraft than other simulators such as, for example, Prepared or X-Plane. Now there is one huge difference, however, and that is the recent updates that Sim Update 11 and finally the Aircraft and Avionics update are bringing. Especially aircraft like the Airbus A310 or the DC-3 that have been introduced with Sim Update 11 and the aircraft that are being updated with the Aircraft and Avionics update are really a game changer to Microsoft Flight Simulator. Prior to that, the default aircraft, while looking better than in any other simulator, would certainly not have outcasted any other sim. However, the new updates introduced, especially the study level A310 and those changes to the default Garmin avionics that we are seeing in the Aircraft and Avionics update, do make a huge difference. In other words, for the high-end seeking study-level simmer, there actually is a huge variety of aircraft available in this simulator, which absolutely outmatches any other sim. There are also some aircraft for entry-level simmers like the default 747 or the default A320, which do provide a good introduction into flying big tube liners, but there is just something for everyone available in the default simulator, and that is something we don't see in any other sim. Now let's quickly talk about add-on aircraft as well. The market for add-on aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator is huge, and while there often are people that do complain about why Microsoft Flight Simulator can't do this or can't do that, I'm one of those. We also have to admit that the quality of add-on aircraft released in 2022 for Microsoft Flight Simulator pretty much matches what we have available in other simulators. Thinking about aircraft like the Phoenix A320, like the Fly the Mad Dog, like the PMDG 737 or the BAE 146. Thinking about the analog King Air or the analog Caravan. All of these aircraft are on par with the add-on aircraft we have available in other simulators. In other words, while initially the sim has been a little bit lagging behind in terms of add-on aircraft compared to other simulators, it has not only caught up, but it has drawn even to the add-on aircraft available. And that is not even taking into account the high-quality freeware fly-by-wire A320, which is on par, if not even outmatches, the second best freeware aircraft that I know in other flight simulators, which would be the Cibo 737. In other words, in terms of aircraft, Microsoft Flight Simulator is ahead of anything. Let's move on to the next topic, which is going to be visuals and the world. I don't think there will be any doubt with any one of you that the visuals in Microsoft Flight Simulator are simply the best looking compared to P3D and X-Plane 12. So, in combination with that, I do want also to talk about the world. In my time using P3D, which I did extensively before starting with Microsoft Flight Simulator, I had folders with over 1 terabyte of photorealistic terrain. And I know that a lot of X-Plane users are using the same with the orthographics, and that has been totally eliminated by Microsoft. The entire world available in photorealistic data is just something that we've never seen before, and the fact that they are able to place houses, trees, and everything so accurately just is something that we have never seen and makes VFR flying in the simulator an absolute joy. I don't actually think that there is a lot more to say about the visuals and the world, because the simulator and what we currently see on screen just totally speaks for itself here. Of course, there is a little downside in that seasons are only very limited available at the moment, and that we only have summer and snow. However, we do know Microsoft is working on getting an update that they introduce spring and autumn as well, So chances are that we are going to see something there in the future. All in all, even with those minus points considered, I would say that Microsoft Flight Simulator still outcasts any of the other simulators available. Next up, let's talk about the flight model. So the flight model is the biggest point of criticism on Microsoft Flight Simulator in my opinion. At the moment, there just is no very good flight model available, and even looking at the add-on aircraft we have in terms of the 737, of the MD-80, and while a little bit less evident since masked by the fly-by-wire in the A320, we can see it in the Phoenix A320 as well. And that is that the flight model just doesn't feel 100% accurate and certainly can use a little bit of improvement. Those of you who are using X-Plane 12 and have flown the Cibo 737, but also have flown general aviation aircraft in X-Plane 12, will surely be familiar with the differences and will just be aware that in X-Plane 12 everything feels more authentic. Let me just give a little example of one of my points of criticism on the flight model in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and that is the trim system. And this one is based on my experience with the 737, the MD-80, the analog King Air, but also a couple of the default aircraft where the problem is evidently equal. So, that is the way you trim your aircraft. And this is actually something that I've recently talked about with a colleague of mine who is also using Flight Simulator, and we spent over an hour in flight discussing the handling qualities of Microsoft Flight Simulator. And our one big point of criticism, there are others, but one big one is the trim system. So trimming an airplane out in Microsoft Flight Simulator feels almost impossible to me. You just constantly have to do changes, and let's say an aircraft is trimmed out for a certain speed, you get a disturbance like some turbulence, and when the turbulence is over and the aircraft is on speed again, it should still be trimmed out. But in Microsoft Flight Simulator, it feels like you do need to trim again, and that is something that absolutely should not be the case. So, trimming an airplane out is so much easier in real life than it is in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and that is a big point of criticism. Another one, for example, is the thrust pitch couple. So when you're changing your thrust, you should see quite an impact on your airplane's pitch, and while I can't go into too many details, we did try to do that in the 737, and it should still be quite a bit stronger, and the same goes for pretty much any other airplane that I've flown in MSFS, be it the default Cessna 172, be it the King Air, or be it whatever. So that's something, once again, that X-Plane is far superior to Microsoft Flight Simulator. However, to be totally fair, we have to put MSFS somewhat in the middle here, so I do believe the MSFS flight model is still better than the flight model in P3D. And this leads us to the next important point, which is closely related to the flight model, and that is the weather. So, I think we can hands down say that, talking in terms of default weather engines, but also of weather engines available by third-party developers for X-Plane and P3D, we can say that the default Microsoft Flight Simulator weather engine is hands down the best we've seen in a flight simulator so far. There are still big points of criticism in that I do believe that frontal systems are not very well developed. Thunderstorm systems just look different in MSFS than they do in real life, and that is stuff that certainly does need a bit more work, but I do understand that Microsoft has some issues getting the weather system to totally replicate the real life systems, because if they actually did that, if they actually developed the entire system to be 100% accurate, then I do believe it would be a huge impact on performance, because weather systems in real life are just so different. So let's just talk about an example. I'm sure that all of you know those lovely pictures where you're looking from flight level 370 downwards, and you see a lot of very tiny clouds lying at low level, so to say, which is really something that I have never seen in any other flight simulator. So in flight simulators, the clouds are always a lot bigger than they are in real life, or at least than under these conditions they would be in real life. So that, however, is something, when they really changed that to replicate the real life, I can imagine it to be very performance intensive. So that's probably a reason why they had to simplify that a little bit. And if we're totally honest, The weather system looks awesome in Microsoft Flight Simulator, even though it would still be nice to see some cirrus clouds eventually, but I do really hope that we'll eventually get there. However, the overall weather system in MSFS really beats anything that we've seen in other simulators, and that is even taking into account weather add-ons like Active Sky and P3D, for example. And I have talked about it a little bit now, but the next big topic is performance. Now, when I saw the first screenshots of Microsoft Flight Simulator in the pre-release stages where the beta had not even started, I thought immediately like, oh no, this is going to become the next big FPS hog, just like FSX has been when it's been released, meanwhile almost 15 years ago. And I was totally blown away by the actual performance and how smooth the simulator worked when I installed the first beta version on my computer. And I still am to date really happy with the performance versus the visuals that we have in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Sure enough, default X-Plane and default P3D also have significant performance and are performing really well. However, once you add all the add-ons to make it look even somewhat like Microsoft Flight Simulator, and that is not saying that it can achieve the visual quality of MSFS at all, but let's say you bring it to the closest possible by adding all the photoreal terrain, maxing out those auto-generated buildings and trees. There just is that huge difference still, and the fact that MSFS does perform so well with all the graphic details we see really makes Microsoft Flight Simulator stand out in terms of the performance that this simulator delivers. And with the performance covered, we only have a single topic about MSFS itself left, and that is updates. Now, P3D sees some regular updates every couple of months, X-Plane also sees some regular updates, but none of these has been as extensive as the updates we see in Microsoft Flight Simulator. The free world updates provided and the sim updates provided have added so much quality into the simulator, and that entirely for free, that is just unbeatable by anything else. Just thinking about the A310 alone, that one could have been sold at the same price like the base Microsoft Flight Simulator at all. And other add-ons are really lifting the simulator up to a default level that has not been seen anywhere else. And the fact that Microsoft is still actively working on Microsoft Flight Simulator and providing not only fixes to the bugs that they surely have, but also providing new content like recently helicopters, gliders, coupled study level airliners, greatly enhanced Garmin avionics. All of that really is stuff that should not just be seen as, well, that's nice, but they had to do that anyway, but it really shows the effort that Microsoft brings into the simulator and shows that they stand committed to providing us one of the best possible simulators. Now, at this point, I just quickly have to say that I am actually not paid by Microsoft for creating this video. So I really praise them in this video because on my channel we talked so much about the up and downsides of what the simulator offers that it might become very easy, especially with all the downsides pointed out, like the weather radar, for example, that it might become very easy to actually miss how great of a simulator Microsoft Flight Simulator actually is. And that leads us right into the last topic. And this leads us right down to the last point that I want to talk about in this video, that is using Microsoft Flight Simulator for real-life aviation training. Before we start with this section, we quickly need to define what you can, and most importantly what you cannot achieve by using a home simulator for real-life aviation training. And what you can not achieve is practicing hand flying an aircraft. That is something very important over here. Even with the most expensive hardware that I've seen in home usage, even with the hardware that costs several tens of thousands of euros, it is not possible to practice accurately for any real-life aviation. So let's talk about what you can do then with home flight simulators. You can, as a student pilot, try to replicate what you are going to do in your next real-life session. So, for example, you can learn certain procedures, you can learn the instrument scan, you can get a general idea of how things interact with one another. You can familiarize yourself with the local traffic pattern at your home airport, you can familiarize yourself with cross-country VFR navigation. And for those of you who are a little step further already and want to study for IFR, you can learn pretty much all your IFR procedures. So, for those of us who are pure flight simmers and not related in real-life aviation training, here's a little something for you to think about. Most student pilots, when they do their instrument ratings, go through a lot of extensive ground-based training in so-called Flight Navigation and Procedure Trainers, FNPTs. And these are literally a mock-up of a cockpit, in some cases built after a real-life aircraft, in other cases just a generic one, where you typically have something like a G1000 in, or something like an Avidyne avionics display in. And those are not meant to replicate any aircraft correctly, and indeed their flight model is often worse than the flight models we see, for example, in X-Plane. However, that is not the intention of those simulators. They are purely built so that people can familiarize themselves with the basics of IFR navigation, and where they may be able to practice an engine failure. However, even that is normally not that accurate in FNPTs. Therefore, let's talk about how our different home simulators are usable for those practices. I will start with P3D, because P3D is the most basic of the three current big simulators. And P3D does offer a little bit of everything, but nothing is really good, so the airport layouts are normally quite up to date. However, they do not really provide any extensive simulation of the terrain around the airports, making them only limited usable for practicing things like your traffic pattern. You can use it for your instrument scan, but you can do the same in the other two simulators, so let's keep that outside. Let's talk about X-Plane then. X-Plane especially stands out with a very good flight model, and for sure if you're a general aviation pilot currently studying for your PPL, then X-Plane is the simulator you want to go for if you want to learn the most about flight models. However, be aware of the limitations. Be aware that using homemade hardware, or using those couple €100 hardwares that we typically see in flight simulation, you will not get any kind of feeling for how to fly an aircraft. That is something that you can only learn in the real plane, unless you want to buy a multi-million Cessna simulator, but for that plane rather buy a couple real-life Cessnas. Okay, so X-Plane does provide a very good set of basics of what you can do, and I would say X-Plane actually provides almost equal set of things you can do with it as Microsoft Flight Simulator, with a single difference, which in my opinion is the difference why Microsoft Flight Simulator wins this one, and that is the visuals. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, you can, without the need for any add-ons, do accurate VFR navigation. You have the entire model of the world, well, almost, with a couple of the places where there is no satellite data available, but for the majority of us, the entire amount of the world where you can accurately learn to fly your traffic patterns, where you can practice cross-country navigation. And then of course you have those default avionics that are just about coming with the Aircraft and Avionics update, which do provide a very solid set for IFR navigation as well. Let alone if you really want to go deep into IFR procedures, you have that A310, and that one really is flyable by the SOPs of a real airliner, giving you a good idea of what it would be like to fly an actual airliner. And that, in my opinion, is the point why Microsoft Flight Simulator is best suited for real-life flight training out of the three simulators in question. Now, again, we have to point out that none of these is actually certified for flight training, and none of these is going to replace your flight training. But using them as an aid to flight training really is something that will elevate your flying to different levels, and that is going to make flight school a lot easier for you, in that you can study a lot of the procedures ahead of time. Now, that is going to be the end of this video. I would like to thank you very much for sticking with me all the way to the end. Hope that you have enjoyed this one, and I'm looking forward to hear what you guys are going to say about the different topics I brought up. Once again, I do feel the need to say that I have not in any way been paid or motivated by Microsoft to create this video, but I only felt it to do justice to Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is an excellent flight simulator. So, We complained a lot about the features it lacks on this channel, but it is only fair to also point out the good things that it is doing. With that, thank you very much for watching. I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one. And as always, like, comment and subscribe. And if you do want to support the channel, you can do so using the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for joining, and I see you all again on the next one.